Hey everyone, I'm Alan Shimel, and welcome to another DevOps Unbound. For those of you not familiar, DevOps Unbound is a bi-weekly video series where we discuss and try to take a little bit of a deeper dive into different aspects of DevOps and different questions and theories and practices around DevOps. We're very, very proud to be affiliated with our friends at Tricentis, who have sponsored DevOps Unbound since day one. It's been coming up on 2 years now, and couldn't ask for a better partner and sponsor for us on DevOps Unbound here as we go where no video show's gone before on DevOps, right? We hit just about everything we think our audience would like to talk about. And speaking of that, we actually have a topic that I think you are going to like today. I should mention, though, that in addition to these, for this particular format that you're going to see today, which is our panel format, we also do a monthly DevOps Unbound roundtable with a live audience. So you out there watching this get to participate and drive the discussion. That's not the format for today, but we will have one again coming up in another 2 weeks or so. And I encourage you to sign out for that and become part of the DevOps Unbound experience. It's actually a lot of fun. So for today's DevOps Unbound, though, we're going to take a look at the whole question of, how we disseminate DevOps in an organization. There's been a lot written and spoken about it. There's been many sessions at conferences. I've had the pleasure of listening and learning from several people. But DevOps has presented us with sort of a unique path, a unique road on how do we go organization-wide in DevOps. DevOps almost invariably starts with little bubbles of DevOps, I call them, at enterprises, right? Small teams who adopt some DevOps ways. And then, if they succeed, or sometimes even if they don't, that builds momentum within an organization. And more of the teams do DevOps. But at some point, you want to bring all that disparate learning. You want to bring all these disparate teams together. And you want to start setting down your emerging practices, your best practices on how we do DevOps. And it's taken many forms at organizations. We've had things like DevOps Dojos. We've had internal DevOps days as part of DevOps Dojos kind of things. We've had centers of excellence. We've had communities practice. I messed that up, but Shaaron will correct me shortly. There's been a lot of ways to skin the cat, right? I don't know if one way is necessarily the best way. I think your mileage varies by the organization, but we're going to jump into all of that today. To do it, I couldn't think of some better people than our folks today we have on board. Let me introduce you now to our panel for today. First of all, I'm so happy to see him. I'm going to see him in person in June at our RSA DevSecOps event. He's a fixture there. He's with a different company now than the last time I saw him there, but that was 3 years ago. Larry Maccharone. Larry, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Alan. Thanks for having me here. Great. And I look forward to seeing you and the whole, everyone from the community at RSA. That'll be great.
Larry, why don't you give folks a little bit of your background?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm work with a new company, Contrast Security. But before that, I launched and scaled for 5 years the DevOps Transformation Program, or DevSecOps Transformation Program, depending upon how you think of it, at Comcast, the large conglomerate for telecommunications. Comcast, 600 different development teams, 10,000 developers were the target audience for ours. And we did it in something borrowing from dojos with coaching, but a little more like a community of practice, in that the folks that we were working with were also contributing to the content and the evolution of the program.
Excellent. Joining Larry and I is Shaaron Alvares. Shaaron, welcome to DevOps Unbound.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Alan and Mitch. I'm really, really excited. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm very fond of all the events we're organizing, and so DevOps Unbound, the roundtables, and so on. So fantastic.
Thank you for joining us. Shaaron, why don't you give folks a little bit of your background?
Yeah, so I have been in the Agile space for nearly almost 15 years now. I've led significant transformations. First, I started in France, where I work with Alcoa fastening system. I have a puppy in the background, so you may hear him. And in Seattle, I led some significant transformations with larger corporations such as Amazon, Expedia, Microsoft. I've been focused on Agile and DevOps. So like Larry, I had an opportunity to set up actually some DevOps Agile and DevOps Dojo. And in fact, I'm starting out with an Agile Dojo right now at Salesforce. Yeah, I'm working with Salesforce right now in Agile delivery.
Excellent. Okay, then our fourth member today is my co-host and partner and friend, Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitchell, great to see you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
You bet. Hey, Alan. Hi, Larry. Hi, Shaaron. What a great panel. I can't wait to hear from you all. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with TechStrong Group and also principal with TechStrong Research, and having gone through my own couple of DevOps transformations, have to be transparent and say we didn't get to use a dojo at that time. So I'm fascinated and want to learn, just like our audience too. So, but I am have been passionate about learning organizations. And that's a lot of what we talk about with Centers of Excellence and dojos and things like that. So how do we create a community of learning? So I think it'll be a fascinating discussion.
Absolutely. So let's dive into it, guys. I gave my 2 cents, right? I think for whatever reason, DevOps and DevOps and Agile, for that matter, have lend themselves really well to these concepts of, in an internal methodology, an internal process of learning, of sharing. Because I think dojos and centers of excellence and community practices are as much about sharing as they are about learning. It's a two-way street. Why DevOps and Agile? What makes them so special that this emerges the way, right? The way to do these things.
The opening line of the Agile Manifesto is essentially learning by doing. And so you have to have both the learning and the doing, right? It's evolving your practice based upon feedback from evidence from earlier executions of the same thing. And so you have to be doing it. So I personally am an active developer, write code every day, author of a dozen open source projects, one of which gets 1 million downloads a month. So not trivial size projects here. And I'm practicing DevOps and DevSecOps and Agile as I go, and Kanban as I go. And that's evolving the way I think to ever better ways of doing it.
Shaaron, what?
Yeah, this is fantastic, Larry. And that's a really good question, Alan. I think one of the struggle as a lot of organizations are trying to adopt, Agile, DevOps, DevSecOps, is the upskilling piece, right? We have to upskill and then scale. And then there's the return on investment on training and time spent in training, in instructor-led training, for example. And we know that those are not very effective today. We know that this is not effective. It's not actually how developers learn. And so recurring to format models such as the DevOps Dojo, Agile, Product Engineering, DevOps Dojo, I like to not focus only on DevOps, is a really, really good way not only to upskill, to learn, get also feedback, on how transformation leaders can do better at scaling and fostering that learning. But it's also a really great way to get engagements. Developers, product teams, they rather spend 6 to 8 weeks working on projects that are really meaningful to them than sitting in a classroom and doing a boot camp. So I think this is a great way to introduce Agile and DevOps in an organization.
Absolutely.
I think too, Alan, also both Agile and DevOps, they're not about technologies. They're not about tools. Yes, they're supporting tools. It's about how we do things. And I think what's really part of why it's caught on so much is that it's not like the old waterfall methodologies where the methodology got put in some binder and we referred to it and we were ready to go to the next phase. It's about how teams and individuals work together and collaborate together to produce something on a much shorter interval. And so there's a lot of learning that happens very quickly. So it's not just about learning; it's happening fast. I mean, you learn every iteration of a Scrum meeting or a sprint, or as we're setting up a CI/CD pipeline and delivering code. So we can increment and learn much faster with these techniques. So it's really fascinating to watch.
I think another theme that follows all the way from Agile to today is around breaking down silos. So, and this isn't the only thing that Agile did, but to a large degree, Agile essentially said, okay, well, quality, we're not going to throw it over the wall to a QA department anymore. The development team is going to be at least partially responsible and more wholly responsible for the quality of the products they produce. And on the other end, product management, they become more actively involved in that, with the role of the product owner essentially being part of the development team to a lesser degree. And then you move on to the DevOps movement and the cloud native movement, and they were really about breaking down the silos between the development team and IT ops. And so that, again, the development team does more of that work now, not all of it. And then the role of those folks shifts more to being toolsmithing. Same thing with DevSecOps. The security group was a throw it over the wall function, still is largely at a lot of organizations. And nowadays, though, developers with shift left security and dev first security are being asked to take a bigger role in securing the products that they're developing. And I think this breaking down of silos allows the learning to be holistic, instead of it to be just, hey, I do my job QA and I do my job development. Now I have to develop in a way that results in high quality. And so you get more holistic decision making. So the learning is got a broader scope and isn't just one silo at a time, which makes it much more optimized for the thing that's the most important for you at that given moment in time.
I would say to that, though, Larry, is we won't be successful if we just keep throwing straws on the developers' backs, because eventually the camel's back breaks, right? I think rather than thinking of them as developer teams, we need to think of them as agile teams and DevOps teams. And it's not just what we think of as developers as part of those teams. The security guy's part of that team now. He's not on the other side of the wall.
Exactly. I actually say
not only he didn't have to climb the wall, we opened the door for him.
Yeah. I actually say engineering teams now, but
engineering teams, good.
Rather than development teams most of the time. But the point is, though, I think if you say engineering teams and people don't actually behave like one team, they just say, oh, we're a team. And we collaborate, we talk, we hug each other every once in a while. That doesn't work. That's just sort of lip service to it. You actually have to operate as
right. You got to operate as a team. It's team with a capital T, not a small t.
Exactly.
And shout out to our Tricenter sponsors, right? The Q&A folks. I mean, Q&A and testing professionals having given way to developers, they've become part of those engineering teams and taken their rightful place in there. Automation helps, right? Automation helps, but it's not by and in of itself. Anyway, I want to jump, if you don't mind a little bit, I want to shift a little bit, right? So I look at this and I say, okay, you look at things like ITSM and IDLE. You didn't have this kind of thing going on there. There, you took your courses from some corporate trainer. You got certified. I mean, with Agile, you can be, your Scrum certification or whatever, and that kind of. But there's more to it than that in Agile, where in ITIL and ITSM, that was it. With Agile DevOps, in that continuum, we've seen, as we've said, community practices, Center of Excellence, Dojo. For our audience, what's the difference? What are these different things, and why do we care? Why don't we? Why aren't they all the same? Shaaron, I know you have strong opinions. Center of Excellence versus community practice. What's the difference to you?
Yeah, you all shared some really amazing and on-point feedback, by the way, earlier. I will run on those later. But to answer your question, Alan, you're right. So the dojo is a very different experience. I want to say it's literally an experience for teams. But between the Center of Excellence and the Committee of Practice, the challenge and maybe the pitfalls of a Center of Excellence, they are highly centralized. They are set up by an organization. They are led by directors. They have a specific teams, and that teams develop templates, and we try to, roll out or standardize those templates across an organization. So it's not owned by the employees. We can definitely, provide feedback, introduce templates and models and so on. But it's more centralized. And the committee of practices, I want to explain the difference, actually, what it leads to. The committee of practices are generally more employee-owned, so it's really a community owned by, you could have a committee of practice for architects. You could have a committee of practices, in fact, for testers, a little bit like the guilds. You could even have something for, security, availability, and so on. And so they really they define the community of practice, so they have more freedom. And the benefit is because when you have a community of practice, it's a lot more sustainable. People can come and go, but you have some sort of sustainability across the organization. It doesn't break, it doesn't lose its momentum when a director, leaves the Center of Excellence. We have a new leadership and so on. So which is the Center of Excellence may take a new directions or may stop as well. But the community of practices are more organic, and I like this aspect. I did an interview with Nicole Force-Grain. I think it was in 2019. It's published on InfoQ, where she actually explained beautifully the difference between the Center of Excellence and community of practice. And I very much agree with her. Yeah.
Fair. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I focus less on sort of the definition of the and we really have talked about, I think, 4 different things at this point: Dojo, Center of Excellence, Community of Practice, and Guild. And I would say they're sort of on the spectrum from really intense, immersive to lighter touch, I guess, and maybe those last 2 could be swapped depending upon how you define them. But so the program I put together at Comcast borrowed from the dojo concept, in that there is a coach dedicated to each individual development team, but we didn't take them out of doing their own work. We essentially coached them in place. So just like a basketball team or a baseball team or a football team that's playing games every week, you don't have time to sort of say, take them out. We're going to take you out of the league for a few weeks and train you intensely. No, we're going to coach you every week and learn by doing. And so we had this concept of a gradual on-ramp, and we centrally defined the list of practices that development teams should all be striving towards, but that was contributed completely by the community. So in that sense, it was a community of practice. But the coaches that were employed by my program would meet with each individual development team, and the list of practices were essentially prioritized by the best bang for the buck. And we'd start with the top 5, 6, 10, and we talk about them with the team, not just sort of say, this is a survey, are you doing it or not? And we're going to check you off or mark you down. It's not red, amber, green. It's what do you think about this? And do you understand what it means? And what would it take for you guys to actually, or gals, to actually adopt this practice and make it produce value for our company? And as soon as we got to 2 or 3 of these items, that they weren't doing at the value delivery level, the full cultural level, we call that, we stopped the gap analysis. We didn't need to talk to them about the other 30 practices because, we're just going to say, okay, these are the top ones. Let's make a plan and a commitment in the next 90 days for you to adopt those to the point of delivering value. And then we would help them over the next 90 days. And then we come back and they might pick we do another little workshop and they might pick another 2 or 3 practices to adopt. So at this point, it takes about 1.5 years for a team to get from wherever they are, low levels of maturity, to sometimes very high levels of maturity of DevOps and DevSecOps.
I'm curious too. One of the observations I have is sometimes it's what the organization is kind of used to working with. If you already have centers of excellence or community of practice or some way you've established those kinds of not functions, but sort of built into the DNA of the organization. Seems like take advantage of that. If you already are a community of practice organization, go build on it. If it's centers of excellence, go build on it. It seems like a good way to get started. Agree?
Yeah, I very much agree with everything you said, Alan, as well. I think you touched on it when we talked about Larry, when you mentioned we learn and we do, and we learn as we do. So I think we forget often to apply an iterative and implemented approach to actually all of those models, right? So the DevOps Dojo has to evolve based on feedback that we're receiving, based on engagement, based, on the return on investment and so on. And same for the Center of Excellence and Committee of Practice. In all of the dojos and Committee of Practice that I set up, I had to adjust, based on engagement, based on the feedback and so on. So I think as long as we adopt this iterative and we listen, to the audience, we listen to what people are saying and what they need, I think we can be successful no matter what format we're using. I very much agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mitchell, similar to Shaaron, at Comcast, when I started, there was the concept of a guild was in place a little bit, and the concept of a center of excellence was in place a little bit. The center of excellence for Agile, though, was considered a failure by a lot of the engineering groups. And when I looked at sort of why, the engineering folks felt like it became a navel-gazing organization where the Agile experts all hung out there, and they didn't actually sort of participate actively with the development groups, and they weren't focused on true Agile. It was a lot of cargo cult Agile, where we're going through the motions. But yeah, we have daily stand-ups, but they're not getting the full value out of adopting Agile. And so I sort of had some baggage associated with those. So I didn't name my program either of those two things intentionally, just to sort of avoid that.
It seems, I know one of the things that can happen with us too is it can become sort of the voice from on high, right? The elitist sort of course, people hate that. They don't want to go talk to the monks of the whatever the practice is. It seems like that's the dojo, the boot camp, the workshop. It's the hands-on, do it together, learn by doing practice under whatever scenario you want to call it that works best for people.
And I think it does because it's very centered on the challenges that those product engineering teams are trying to solve. Whereas oftentimes Center of Excellence, I do agree with what you said, Larry. Sometimes I know it's a story at Comcast, but I have seen similar patterns in other organizations where the Center of Excellence operate more like a project management type of a PMO. It operates more like a PMO. And it feels often disconnected from the challenges, the constraints of teams, product engineering teams. And that's where I was that's the difference I was pointing between, CoE and COPs. And with the DevOps, with the dojos, I think it's completely different because the approach is not about, it's not so much top down. We really start with the teams. We start with their challenges. There's no charter to focus on and scale something, but the focus is really to look at the constraints that the teams have. They come with their challenges, and we help them solve their challenges. So I think that's a huge difference between dojos and Center of Excellence, or even COPs. COPs, we can make it center on the challenges that we have better than with a center of excellence.
Fair to say that more of a bottom, not purely, but more of a bottoms-up approach as opposed to passing knowledge on from on high.
Yeah, very much agree. And Larry, I want to say something. You talked about, you all talked about breaking down the silos, and so I think the dojo is a fantastic place. I used to name it a value stream dojo. The reason why it's because I work with people who, for example, BMW presented at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in 2019. And when they presented, they actually shared a little bit of information. Fantastic video, by the way, it's posted on YouTube. They shared a little bit of information about how they called it Biz DevOps Dojo, because they wanted to include the business, they wanted to include product folks, and they wanted to include UX. So they all work together within the dojo with the engineering team towards an improvement, towards an initiative, actually something that was meaningful to them. And I love this approach, and that's really what I'm trying to do in all of the dojo. And so I try to include, right now I call it Agile Dojo, but the objective is to make sure that we include the product team, UX, we have documentation teams as well. So I love this approach, and I like to call it value stream. Yeah, we have a new guest on the show.
You're going to have to introduce your new guest here.
From the dojo.
But I love the idea of calling it value stream, and because it really is a value stream. A value stream is essentially a set of steps that you go through to deliver value for your organization. It includes product thinking about the market and UX and all the way to getting it in the user's hands. One key concept that I think is really comes out when you start talking about a value stream is this idea from the theory of constraints. And so, just to explain this for the audience, is think of it, it's not exactly, and some experts don't like me using this analogy, but think of the weakest link, right? So if you have a chain and you improve the strength of any one link in that chain, the overall chain is not going to get stronger unless the link you improved was previously the weakest link. And then the chain gets stronger. Well, the theory of constraints is similar, that in any value stream, there's one dominant choke point, essentially bottleneck, place where work gets backed up from or loses its quality the most or loses its effectiveness the most. In a value stream with humans and variation, it's not like a chain where it's always one link. It shifts around a little bit. So it's a statistical problem, not an actual single point. But the same idea holds true. And Gene Kim says this very explicitly in his writing, the Phoenix Project. He's got the 3 ways of DevOps. Flow is the first one. Feedback is the second one. And experimentation and learning is the third one, which we've already touched on. But flow is essentially all about the theory of constraints. And he summarizes it, that improvements made anywhere but at the bottleneck are an illusion. And basically you can be doing good things elsewhere in the value stream. Maybe QA is not the bottleneck, but they're doing good things improving it, or security is not the bottleneck, but they're doing good things improving it. And it doesn't improve the overall ability of the organization to deliver value because they weren't the bottleneck at that moment in time.
Yeah, I like the visual of, if you aren't working on the constraint, the bottleneck, anything ahead of it basically is making more stuff arrive at the bottleneck faster. That's not helpful. Or if you're working on anything after it, you're making those more efficient, so they're sitting in a wait state with nothing to do because you're still waiting on the stuff from the bottleneck. And the bottleneck always moves. So as soon as you've addressed that, the next thing pops up as the next place to work, usually. So it's a great visual. I'm curious, both of you have such great experience, doing centers of excellence and community practice and dojos. Are there some common lessons you've seen, 2 or 3 kind of things you've picked up along the way? Usually this is a challenge that we experience here. Usually this is a progression that we go through, having done it a few times or more than a few times. Shaaron, any thoughts that you've seen kind of over time?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be over-engineered when we start. I used to think that we need a charter, we need to set expectations and so on. And I don't think it's the case. Right now, I'm starting something very scrappy, organically, and I want to see interest, how people are going to come into the dojo and use it. And the other thing, I think it's really important to tell success stories continuously in order to drive engagement. So the dojo is going to be the place where people come. We don't voluntold. We don't want to impose it on people. We want them to to see the value and come with their challenges and work with us, right? So in order to make that successful, to make that happen, it's really important to tell the success stories. So when a team comes into the dojo, we need to clearly understand the challenges, document that. And when they leave the dojo, it's really important to share the success stories. That could be metrics, that could be a story, but it's important that could be a video, but it's really important to support them, show them recognize the investment that they've done while they came to the dojo. So one thing that I'm doing right now, I have several programs for the dojo. And for each time I have belts, badges and bells. So I love having a system that recognizes the investment in learning, actually. So that's something that I've learned over time.
Yeah, so I love what you said there, Shaaron. It feels like organic evolution of the program, whatever you call it, is important. So it's sort of like being agile about developing an agile program or a DevOps program or a DevSecOps program. So I really do like that. So for me, I have 2 other lessons learned, although that one would have been one of my 3. The first one is we've touched on it a little bit already, is to not let the folks who just care about the subject matter of whatever it is, Agile or DevOps or DevSecOps, the second DevSecOps or QA take over and really have the folks who care about delivering value. And it was centered around the development team, which has now been expanded to be a more engineering team, as Alan was saying earlier. The other thing I have as lesson learned, which Shaaron said, we all know that instructor-based training is not effective. Well, I didn't know that when I started my program at Comcast, and I had to learn it the hard way. It is to focus on this idea of contextual learning instead of instructor-based learning. And so there's 3 pillars of contextual learning. The first one is that it has to be important to the work you're currently doing, situated. And so like providing feedback to a developer in the pull request, because they're trying to get their work accepted into the product with the pull request. They're going to pay a very close attention to any feedback, and they're going to do the learning deeply, get the learning deeply because of that. Social, and Shaaron touched on this also, is that you have to spread the word, you have to reward folks for it. The pull request actually provides a social positive reinforcement because their peers get to see that their code got accepted into the next higher level branch. But things like gamification and leaderboards and parties for the person. There was one business unit leader who challenged another business leader unit to have the most maturity improvement in their engineering teams. And then the loser was going to have to wear an Easter bunny outfit to work during the season, at the end of the 90-day period, and then distributed as the third pillar of contextual learning, meaning that the organization really supports the value of this learning. And so I really have shifted to everything is contextual learning, nothing instructor-led, nothing video-based. It's all got to be basically just-in-time learning.
It's awesome, Larry. I love it. It gave me so many great ideas. And maybe the last thing I want to say, make it as inclusive as possible. Like I said, include UX, include not just the core engineering team, but, product teams, and make it as inclusive as possible to make it more, effective. And
Great. Well, we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a chance to think about how you want to answer this last question. Curious about resources. We talked about learning within organizations. How about learning from each other outside? What are some maybe really great resources? Can be anything from books to Slack or groups or whatever. Are there any that either one of you might recommend to someone in our audience who's kind of looking for that next place to go, learn more, help bring that back into their organization? Whoever wants to go first.
If I understood your question, Mitch, is what are the other opportunities of learning? Is that right?
What resources might you have to go learn more about doing a dojo or a community? Where can I learn from in addition to watching DevOps Unbound?
Yeah. So this is a really good question because, how do you start a DevOps Dojo? So there are a few really good. Now it's getting traction, and there are a few good resources on YouTube. My go-to resource is the DevOps Enterprise Summit and the Dojo Consortium. So they have a site, Target as a site as well. And the DevOps Enterprise Summit published a lot of videos on DevOps Dojo. There's probably close to 10 videos right now. So I watch them on a regular basis. I've done a panel with Helen Beal and Brian Finster and Eric Chapman. It's published on a Bright Talk. It's a 1 hour like ours, actually. And we cover the question, how to set up a dojo, what's a DevOps dojo, how do we measure it, what do we need to do to make it successful, and so on. So it's a really good Bright Talk recording. And there are few books, so I don't remember the titles on top of my mind, but if we look on Amazon.com, I think there are at least 2 to 3 really good references. But I recommend the videos on YouTube. They're fantastic because they are actually real life examples of what works and what didn't work.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little different angle because I don't know of any resources off the top of my head that are specifically about establishing a dojo or a center of excellence. So I'm going to say, sort of as a foundation, I really love Gene Kim's approach to thinking about DevOps. So really don't just read it, but fetch that and sort of really deeply internalize the 3 ways and sort of like how you would actually implement those and how would you inject those? How would you encourage those to form in the culture of your organization? That would be sort of my biggest recommendation for that. Nicole Forsgren's Accelerate, and I know there were a couple other authors on that book, but or at least one other. Gene Kim might have. Gene Kim I think was actually a co-author of that, but it's really Nicole's work. So that's a good one, and there's a measurement framework in there that I would take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I think that some of the things that if she had a chance to sort of do the research now, she's learned since that book was published herself even. And I think in particular, a couple of the things she measured were good, but there are better ones nowadays. But it's still a great book about being methodical about your feedback in particular. And that's really where I think the big contribution from Nicole is. There's a book, there's a couple of books, volume 1, volume 2. There might have even been a volume 3. I'm not sure, of the epic failures of DevOps and DevSecOps that was published at the, as Alan and I were talking, it released at the RSA conference 2 years in a row. I have a chapter in volume 2 there, but it's really stories about how people made mistakes and learned from them. Again, learning by doing is the theme of this whole conversation. And so I would point to those series of books as well. They're on Amazon as well.
Excellent.
And this is great. And Mitch and Larry, something simple. Reach out to people who've done it. Because you talked about Gene approach, and Gene approach is very much about communities, conferences, and talk. Reach out to people. So reach out to us if you're looking at setting up a dojo or a committee of practice. You don't know how to go about it. Just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you.
Yeah, and along those lines, I'm starting a new organization, transformation.dev. If you go there, there's not much there yet. There's one blog post and about flow, about theory of constraints, which we already mentioned. And there's a sign up sheet to sort of join that community and help contribute to, and sort of like a community of practice, but not bound within a single organization, is the idea behind transformation.dev.
Yeah, transformation.dev. Excellent. Well, we are all out of time, so I'll just give one analogy to wrap things up. As much as I love to watch Bob Ross shows about him painting, there's a difference between watching him and the peacefulness of it to picking up that brush, giving it a try and trying some things. And that's what we're talking about with centers of excellence and dojos and all that, and helping each other learn from that. So pick up a brush and start painting your dojo. And enjoy it, and reach out to people like Shaaron and Larry and so many others on all the great resources. So thank you so much to you both. I feel like we've kind of stepped in halftime in the game, and you guys are all stepping back onto the court, or back to painting, or whatever you're doing, and back to doing your work. And we appreciate you taking the time to share so much knowledge and expertise with everybody.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, absolutely.
You bet. And thank you to our great friends at Tricentis for sponsoring DevOps Unbound. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Alan will be back with us next time. I think he's off building his dojo. He'll be back, and we'll see you all soon.